I do want to begin with that long-awaited development in the investigation into the downing of Flight 752. That Ukrainian Airlines flight was shot down in Iran in early January, killing all 176 passengers on board, including, of course, 55 Canadian citizens and 30 permanent residents. Today, after 6 months of delay, the data from the plane's cockpit was finally downloaded in France. But while that data may provide some answers, families of Canadian victims say the data recorders just aren't the whole story. They don't trust Iran to provide the full picture. Does this government? Marc Garneau is the Minister of Transport, and he joins us from Montreal. Hi, Minister Garneau. Good to have you back on the program.
Hello, Vashi.
Minister, could you be specific about what information or how helpful you anticipate the information downloaded from these recorders will be?
Well, we hope it will provide us with useful information in the minutes and seconds prior to this tragic accident. I can't speculate on what will be on the voice and the data recorder. I understand that they were able to download the data, and I'm looking forward to seeing what data they extract. And how long it lasts depends on the sequence of events. There was at least a first missile hit. We don't know exactly whether that might have disabled the recorders at that moment, in which case we won't get any more data, or it may not, and there may have been something subsequently that stopped the recorders. So we have to find out what data is on it right up to the moment that we lost that data.
Will Canada be able to get its hands on that data, and if so, how soon?
So Canada has two representatives from the Transportation Safety Board there, and they are there as observers because there were Canadians who lost their life on this tragic flight. And so they will be watching the entire proceedings as the data is analyzed, and they may even be asked questions, but they have observer status. And at the end of the day, yes, they will have access to all the data, but it's controlled by the Iranians because the tragic event occurred in Iran, and therefore they have the leader's role at the moment in the investigation, and they decide when to put out the information, when to put out the report itself.
I know you and myself included have heard from various family members who have expressed a lot of concern about Iran's role in the investigative process of all of this, especially family members who tell us very specifically that they don't trust Iran. Do you trust Iran to conduct this investigation in a thorough way?
I trust that the black boxes will be analyzed properly in front of a lot of people. So I am not concerned about the actual analysis of this because there are so many experts that are there. However, the families of the victims have a very good point, which I share, and that is that we have not been able to trust the Iranians up until now. First of all, they denied that they fired missiles. Later on, they tried to intimidate family members. So I can understand the mistrust that exists with the Iranians. They've put out their version of the situation. We are going to make sure that we are satisfied with the facts here. And there are still many facts to come out of this, such as why was that airspace left open? So mistrust is well justified at this point.
And I think also beyond the airspace, why was the missile launched in the first place? That's the number one question that family members keep expressing to us, that they don't feel that the black box certainly will provide some information, the data recorder some information, but certainly they feel like that question remains unanswered. Does your government have any tools at its disposal to try and get those answers for families because they are frustrated?
We will be pushing, and they're right to be frustrated because the data from the recorders, the black boxes, will only tell us what happened up until the point where contact was lost. It will not answer the question as to why was the airspace left open, why was the missile fired, under what circumstances. We're not accepting verbatim the version that the Iranians have given us. We will continue, and remember this leads the international coordination and response group of 5 nations that are going to continue pressing on this so that we are going to continue until we are satisfied that we fully understand and that the Iranians have been transparent and open. And of course, we're going to proceed on that basis with ensuring that justice is rendered and also that compensation and reparation is made to the victims' families.
Respectfully, though, when you say that you'll keep pushing, it has been 6 months already. Family members, again, who we speak to, are not so confident that simply pushing will get any results. Is there anything else in addition? Is there, other than just, consistently telling Iran that this isn't good enough, is there any other mechanism, any other tool at your disposal that your government is prepared to pursue?
Our government does have options in terms of ultimately going to an international court if need be. But I think what's important to remember here is that the Iranians need to know that they are not going to be able to pull the wool over our eyes and give us a story that is not the correct story, because we have the necessary if you like, wherewithal to ensure that we are going to be ultimately given the truth in this. And the Iranians need to know, and I think they know, that they can't cover anything up. So it's ultimately going to come up. Yes, it's not happened as fast as we would like. I went to ICAO in March and said, look, you've already stalled for over 2 months, and they promised to deliver within a 2-week period. They didn't. And then finally, I went back in June and said, look, you are being totally derelict in your duties with respect to Annex 13. We have a small step forward with the boxes now in Paris. It's taking Iran cares about its position in the international community. That is an important pressure tool in itself.
At what point does your government decide to take this to the International Criminal Court? What is the metric to decide that you've had enough of Iran's behavior and now you're going to move on to that step?
Well, there are many countries that are involved, and that is a decision that really would fall to the government. Also involved in this, who lost victims, the British, the Ukrainians, the Swedes, the Afghans. So there are many countries involved in such a process and such a decision.
Okay, Minister, I do want to ask you before I let you go about one other subject under your purview, and that is health precautions being taken by airlines. At the beginning of the month, airlines started selling the middle seat again. I know that there is guidance from Transport Canada on whether or not to do that, but it's just guidance. It's not mandatory. Should it be mandatory?
We have decided that at this point it does not need to be mandatory. And the reason we're saying this is because we are collecting data on the possibility of transmission on board aircraft. With everything that is being done on aircraft with respect to cleaning between flights, with respect to the airflow system, and the way the air flows on the aircraft, there is no evidence, there is not a case yet of somebody actually picking up the virus on board the aircraft. So we are trying to build that database of evidence, because sometimes somebody will be on an aircraft who subsequently tests positive, but we have not yet found anybody in the vicinity of that person who has ever contracted it. So we are building that database so that we have a good idea of whether, in fact, the measures on board the aircraft, I'm just talking on board the aircraft, are such that the risk is infinitesimally small. That's what we want to gather as information.
I guess I wonder, though, and I take your point on waiting for the data or waiting for the evidence, but given everything that's gone on during this pandemic and all the things we don't know, why not be sort of react and go over the top and not wait for that first case to take the precaution?
Well, I'll say two things. First of all, some of the evidence we looked at was way back in March, when there were no restrictions, there were no measures that were put in place. The middle seats were filled. There was no mask wearing. There was no temperature screening, and yet we did not find a case. Secondly, on the general principle that we work on the basis of evidence, we will continue to gather evidence. You cannot prevent sometimes somebody who is pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic from getting on an aircraft. There's no way of detecting it. And so we want to make sure that if that happens, and it has happened, there were 26 cases over a 2-week period in early July. We want to look at the data with respect to those people sitting around them to find out whether there was actually any transmission. And that so far the data, and this is not just Canada that's looking at this, but other countries as well, does not indicate transmission on board aircraft. And that's important as evidence to look at from a scientific point of view, because we can't just sort of react without looking at the actual evidence. And that's what we're trying to do at the moment.
My understanding, though, is, for example, on those 26 cases, I was listening to Dr. Bonnie Henry, the Chief Medical Officer of BC, talk about how the flight manifests are really difficult to get the information they need to contact trace the number of people that they would like to contact trace. They're worried about some of the policies for the airlines as far as cancellation goes, and hesitancy on the part of passengers to actually cancel if they aren't feeling well because of their inability to get a refund or to get, anything along those lines. Are you looking at being a bit more strict with airlines when it comes to those kinds of things?
Well, we are actually, the airlines are ready to provide the information that they have. When it's an international flight, and 16 of those 26 flights were international, the information for contact tracing is provided. It has to be provided. We've been collecting it for a while. So the data is accessible, and we would expect, for example, if somebody was found to be positive in British Columbia, we would expect the health authority to contact the airlines, and the airlines can provide that data. If we're talking about domestic flights, and 10 of the cases out of the 26 were on domestic flights, there at the moment isn't the same contact tracing ability because we can't require passengers to provide that data. But that is why the application that is going to be that's been developed in Ontario, that's going to come up very shortly, and that will be available to the public, will be very useful. Because
yeah, it's delayed 3 weeks though already, and I'm just wondering why not require, Minister, them to provide that information domestically? If
it's on a domestic flight, it would require legislation, because on domestic flights we do not have that authority under the Quarantine Act like we do for international flights.
And any thought to bringing in that legislation, or that's not where your government is headed?
Well, we'd like to get the application in so that we could get people to use it, and that way they could be traced if it was found that somebody on board tested positive a few days later. And I think most passengers would be very happy to provide that data just to be on the safe side. So we're hoping that application will come out as soon as possible. Still, though, depends on whether or not they volunteer to do so. The application, regardless, is volunteer no matter what. Right, and you're right. But passing legislation is a big step, and as you know, passing legislation these days is not a simple matter. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Minister Garneau. Appreciate your time as always. You're most welcome. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.